I'm Daisy Palmer, and that night the world felt like it was holding its breath. The living room was dim, lit only by the flickering glow of a single candle on the coffee table, a cheap dollar store thing, its wax pooling unevenly. I stood in front of the smudged bathroom mirror, my reflection staring back like a stranger. Under my left eye, a bruise bloomed, purple and tender, the kind of mark that doesn't just sting the skin but burrows into your soul. Ryan, my husband, had left it there hours earlier with a backhand so swift I barely saw it coming. It wasn't the first time. Pain was sharp, but the familiarity of it was what gnawed at me, a dull ache in my chest that whispered, "This is your life now." I pressed my fingers to the bruise, not to soothe it, but to feel the truth of it. I wasn't crying. Crying only made the hurt louder, echoing in the hollows of my ribs. Silence was safer. Silence kept me small, contained, invisible. The knock at the door came like a jolt, snapping my spine straight. My parents. They didn't call ahead, they never did, just showed up with grocery bags, the crinkle of plastic as familiar as the scent of their laundry detergent, a clean, floral note that clung to my childhood. I turned from the mirror, the damp washcloth still pressed to my cheek, and shuffled to the living room. TV droned in the background, some mindless sitcom with canned laughter that felt like a mockery of the tension in the air. My mother stepped inside first, her eyes catching mine, then dropping to the bruise. Her hands, clutching a bag of apples and canned soup, trembled for a split second. My father followed, his jaw tight, eyes narrowing, not in concern, but in that calculating way he had, like he was sizing up a problem he didn't want to touch. I waited for a word, a question, anything. But they said nothing. The silence was a blade, slicing through the room, sharper than Ryan's hand had ever been. They moved past me to the kitchen, setting the bags down with deliberate care, as if arranging props for a staged photo. The linoleum floor squeaked under their steps, and the fridge hummed, oblivious. Then they left, the door clicking shut behind them, soft as a sigh. Not a word about the bruise, not a glance back. My throat tightened, but I swallowed it down. I'd learned long ago that hoping for their protection was like chasing a ghost. It slipped through your fingers every time. Ryan sprawled in the recliner, shirtless, a half-empty Bud Light dangling from his hand. He smirked, his voice dripping with smugness. "Your family's real polite, Daisy." Classy folks. The words landed like a taunt, his hazel eyes glinting with the kind of control he thrived on. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My fingers found the candle again, lighting another match, the tiny flame a defiance I didn't yet know how to name. I sat on the couch, small, bruised, but something inside me was shifting, hardening. The air felt heavy, like the calm before a storm breaks. 30 minutes later, when the lock clicked again, my heart didn't race. Steadied. I wasn't the one who'd stay down this time. We'd love to know where you're from. Leave a comment below and share your country with us. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, I highly recommend doing it now so you won't miss any of our upcoming stories. These aren't just ordinary stories, they're filled with meaningful life lessons that can inspire, teach, and stay with you long after the video ends. Hit that subscribe button and join our growing community. That afternoon, the kitchen felt like a pressure cooker, the air thick with the weight of things unsaid. I stood by the sink, scrubbing a plate that was already clean, the sponge squeaking against the ceramic. The window above the sink looked out onto our backyard, a patchy lawn, a rusted swing set left by the previous owners, and a sky bruised with gray clouds rolling in from the west. Ryan was in the living room, sprawled across the recliner, the TV blaring a football game. The roar of the crowd leaked through the walls, a reminder of a world that kept moving while I felt stuck, like a fly in amber. I'd been chewing on the words all day, rehearsing them in my head, but they came out anyway, raw and unpolished. "Ryan," I said, my voice sharper than I meant it to be, "stop treating me like some cheap thrift store find you can toss around." He didn't even look up at first. His eyes stayed glued to the screen, one hand cradling a Bud Light, the other lazily scratching his chest. Then, slowly, his head turned and those hazel eyes locked onto me, cold and unblinking like a predator sizing up prey. "What did you say?" His voice was low, almost a growl, daring me to repeat it. My pulse quickened, but I stood my ground, the plate forgotten in the sink. "I'm serious," I said, my voice trembling just enough to betray me. "I'm not your property." The slap came so fast I didn't see it, only felt the sting explode across my cheek. My body lurched backward, my hips slamming into the edge of the kitchen counter. The impact knocked the air from my lungs and my ear rang like a struck bell. I gripped the counter to steady myself, the linoleum cool under my palms, my vision swimming. Taste of copper bloomed on my tongue, blood from a split lip. Ryan stood over me, his shadow swallowing the light from the overhead bulb. "You done?" he asked, his voice flat like he was scolding a child. Then, as if flipping a switch, his face softened and that honeyed tone crept in, the one he used to reel me back. "Babe, come on. You always push me. You always make it a thing." He reached out, his hand hovering like he might touch my face, but I flinched and he dropped it, chuckling softly. "You're too dramatic, Daisy." I didn't argue. I'd learned that arguing only fed the cycle, his anger, his apologies, my silence. But something in me snapped that day, not loud or dramatic, but quiet, like a thread finally giving way after years of strain. I turned to the sink, grabbed a paper towel, and pressed it to my lip, watching the white bloom red. My reflection caught in the microwave's glass door, pale, bruised, but not broken. "Not yet." I whispered to myself, so soft I barely heard it over the hum of the fridge. I exist. It wasn't a cry for help or a declaration of war. It was a reminder, a tether to the part of me that was still mine, buried deep under years of apologies and excuses. I slipped my phone from my pocket, my hands steady despite the tremor in my chest. I opened the message thread with Sophia, my best friend since college, the one person who'd never looked away when I started to fade. My thumbs hovered over the screen, the blue light casting shadows on my knuckles. "I'm ready," I typed. I stared at the words, my heart thudding, then hit send before I could second-guess myself. I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't need one. Sophia would come. She always did. The house felt smaller after that, the walls closing in like they were listening. I moved to the bathroom, locking the door behind me with a soft click. The fluorescent light buzzed, harsh and unforgiving, illuminating every flaw in the chipped tile floor. I leaned against the sink, the porcelain cold against my palms, and stared into the mirror again. The bruise under my eye was darkening, a storm cloud spreading across my cheekbone. My lip was swollen, a thin crust of blood forming where the skin had split. I didn't cry. Crying felt like surrender, and I was done surrendering. Instead, I ran the faucet, letting the water drown out the distant cheers from the TV. I splashed my face, the cold stinging the bruise, and dabbed my lip with toilet paper, watching the red stains spread like ink on a page. My mind replayed the moment, not the slap, but the words I'd said. They'd felt like a spark, small but dangerous, the kind that could catch and burn everything down if you let it. I'd spent years swallowing those words, burying them under "I'm fine, and it's not that bad." But saying them out loud, even if it cost me a bruise, had shifted something. I wasn't just Daisy, Ryan's wife, the woman who smiled at church potlucks and nodded when his friends called him a good guy. I was Daisy Palmer, and I was still here, still breathing, still fighting. I glanced at my phone again. No reply from Sophia yet, but I could picture her, probably throwing on her denim jacket, her dark hair pulled into a messy bun, her jaw set as she grabbed her keys. She'd been the one to notice the quiet in my eyes months ago, the way I'd started shrinking into myself. "You don't have to stay," she'd said over coffee at a diner downtown, her voice low but fierce. "You're not his prisoner." I hadn't believed her then, but now, with the bruise throbbing and the blood on the paper towel, her words felt like a lifeline. Back in the living room, Ryan had shifted in the recliner, his beer bottle tipped precariously against his chest, his breathing slow and heavy, already half asleep. The room smelled of stale hops and the cheap cedar air freshener he liked, the one that made my nose itch. I moved quietly, my bare feet silent on the carpet, and sat on the couch, the candle still burning on the coffee table. Its flame danced, casting shadows that felt alive, like they were whispering secrets I was finally ready to hear. I didn't know what Sophia would bring when she arrived, but I knew it would be more than just her presence. She'd bring a plan, a way out, a chance to stop hiding. Clock on the wall ticked louder than it should have, each second a pulse in the silence. Side, the wind picked up, rattling the loose screen on the back porch. I sat there, my hands folded in my lap, the bruise pulsing like a heartbeat. I wasn't afraid, not exactly. It was something else, something sharper, like the moment before you step off a diving board, knowing the fall is coming but choosing it anyway. When the lock clicked 30 minutes later, I didn't jump. I stood, my spine straight, and walked toward the door. This time, I wasn't running. I was ready. The front door creaked open, and there was Sophia, standing on the porch like a soldier reporting for duty. No coat, just a thick gray hoodie and jeans, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun. In one hand, she carried a black canvas duffel bag, the kind you'd see at a thrift store, scuffed but sturdy. In the other, a plain brown folder, its edges creased from being gripped too tightly. She didn't say hello, didn't smile, just gave me a single, firm nod, her eyes locking onto mine like she could see straight through to the part of me I'd been hiding for years. The bruise under my eye throbbed as if it knew she was here for it, for me. I stepped aside, and she walked in, her boots leaving faint dirt smudges on the faded welcome mat. The house smelled of stale beer and the lingering lemon cleaner I'd used to scrub the counters, trying to erase the chaos Ryan left behind. I closed the door softly, not wanting to wake the beast snoring in the recliner. Ryan was out cold, the TV still muttering sports scores in the background, the glow flickering across his half-open mouth. I moved to the kitchen, my bare feet silent on the linoleum, and pulled a black envelope from the junk drawer, where it had been hiding among takeout menus and unpaid bills. I placed it next to Ryan's beer bottle, the amber glass sweating onto the coffee table. He stirred, grunted, and mumbled, "What the hell's this?" His voice was thick with sleep and liquor, his eyes barely open. I kept my voice steady, almost too calm, like I was commenting on the weather. "It's not poison, Ryan. But it might kill something else." Inside that envelope were bank statements, screenshots of his transfers, my money, funneled into some garish poker app with cartoon dice and flashing lights. I'd found them months ago, when I'd started digging after noticing my savings account was bleeding out. He didn't know I knew. Not until now. His face twitched, confusion giving way to something uglier, but I didn't wait for it to fully form. I turned and walked toward the bedroom, Sophia right behind me, her presence a quiet anchor. The hallway was narrow, the walls papered in a faded floral pattern that came with the house. The bedroom door clicked shut behind us, muffling the sound of Ryan's muttering. The room was small, cluttered with mismatched furniture, a thrift store dresser, a bed with a sagging mattress, and a mirror above the dresser that caught the bruise on my face every time I passed. Smelled faintly of lavender air freshener, a feeble attempt to mask the undercurrent of fear that clung to the walls. Ryan hadn't slept in here in weeks, preferring the recliner or the couch, but his presence lingered like a stain. Sophia set the duffel on the bed, unzipping it with a quick, practiced motion. I opened the brown folder, my hands steadied despite the pulse hammering in my throat. Inside were the pieces of my survival, a notarized power of attorney giving me control over our shared accounts, photos of bruises I'd taken in secret, incident reports I'd written but never submitted. One from January when he'd shoved me into a wall. Another from June when he'd grabbed my wrist so hard it left a ring of purple. A third from last week when he'd screamed I was nothing but a burden. And then there were the recordings, grainy audio files from nights when he'd come home drunk, his voice slurring venom. "You're nothing, Daisy. Just a weight I'm stuck with." I captured them on my phone, hiding in the closet, my heart pounding so loud I was sure he'd hear it through the door. Sophia had helped me organize it all, her red pen marking dates and details, turning my pain into evidence. I looked up at her and she handed me a tiny recorder no bigger than a lipstick tube. "Fresh batteries," she said, her voice low but firm, like she was handing me a weapon. She didn't need to say more. We'd been planning this for months, not out loud, but in the quiet moments, late-night texts, whispered conversations at the public library, where we'd pretended to browse cookbooks while plotting my escape. She'd told me once, "You don't need this stuff to believe yourself, Daisy, but the courts will." Her belief in me was heavier than any bruise, a lifeline I hadn't realized I'd been reaching for. We were interrupted by a thud from the living room. Ryan was awake. His footsteps were heavy, uneven, as he stormed toward the bedroom, the envelope probably open in his hands by now. I could picture his face, red, twisted, the realization hitting that I'd caught him. The door rattled as he raised his fist to pound on it, but I opened it first, stepping into the hallway just as he lunged. His hand clamped around my wrist, not hard enough to bruise but firm enough to remind me who he thought was in charge. His eyes were wild, pupils sharp with panic. "What is this, Daisy? You think you can play me like this?" His breath reeked of beer and desperation. Before I could answer, Sophia stepped out behind me, her phone already recording, the red light blinking like a warning. "Let go of her," she said, her voice flat, unyielding. "This is live." Ryan froze, his grip loosening like my skin had burned him. He stumbled back, his face draining of color, the smugness gone. I smiled, slow and deliberate. "Smile, Ryan. First time you're on camera." My voice didn't shake, and that surprised me. For once, I wasn't the one trembling. He started shouting, words tripping over each other, entrapment, betrayal, how I'd set him up. But I wasn't listening. I'd already called the police, the number dialed while he was still snoring. The red and blue lights flickered through the blinds minutes later, cutting through the dusk. 2 officers stepped inside, their boots heavy on the hardwood. The younger one, Jake, had a high and tight haircut and a jaw that looked carved from stone. He took the folder from me, flipping through it with a low whistle. "You put this together clean," he said, almost impressed. The other, a woman in her 50s with a nameplate reading Brenly, glanced at Ryan, then at me, her eyes softening just enough to notice. Ryan was still yelling, calling me unstable, but they ignored him, leading him out in cuffs. For the first time, I felt seen, not as a victim, but as someone who'd finally stopped hiding. The house was quiet after they left, the kind of quiet that feels like the air is holding its breath. I sat on the couch, the candle still burning, its flames steadier now. Sophia stayed, her presence a quiet strength as I opened my laptop. I'd been watching Ava Thompson for weeks, a journalist who'd exposed a state senator's abuse and changed laws in the process. I typed an email attaching everything, the photos, the recordings, the bank statements showing Ryan's theft. My fingers paused over the final line. "If I disappear, this is my voice. Publish it." I hit send, my heart steady, not racing. Ava replied within an hour. "This won't be buried. I'll call you tomorrow." The next day, Ava connected me with 2 other women, Mia and Lauren, both with stories too close to mine. We met at a community center, a low brick building that smelled of burnt coffee and chalk dust. The room was small, with folding chairs and a chipped laminate table. We didn't cry or swap war stories, we strategized. Over the next week, we built a website, simple but undeniable, uploading our evidence. Photos, documents, Ryan's voice sneering, "Scream all you want, no one's listening." But we were listening to each other. The site went live with a single statement: "We are not asking for justice. We are showing you the proof you refuse to see." Sitting in my new apartment, a cramped studio with thin walls and a view of a parking lot, I felt the weight of what we'd done. Candle was on the windowsill now, unlit but present, a reminder that I wasn't alone. Ryan's world was unraveling, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what came next. I was ready to write my own ending. The article hit the internet on Monday at 7:02 a.m., pinned to the top of every news site I checked. Ava Thompson's words were like a thunderclap, shaking the foundations of the life I'd been trapped in. The hands behind the silence, 3 women, 1 man, and the system that let him roam. My name was there, alongside Mia's and Lauren's, our stories woven together with the kind of clarity that cut through years of lies. I sat at the tiny kitchen table in my new studio apartment, the screen of my laptop glowing in the early morning light. Place was bare, beige walls, a secondhand couch, a chipped mug of coffee gone cold, but it was mine. The air smelled faintly of fresh paint and the takeout pizza I'd ordered last night, a small act of indulgence after years of cooking for Ryan's approval. Side, the parking lot hummed with the sound of early commuters, their car doors slamming as the world woke up. But inside, I was still, my eyes fixed on the headline, my heart steady but heavy with the weight of what I'd set in motion. By noon, the fallout was everywhere. Ryan's firm issued a statement, termination review initiated, confidentiality lifted. I saw it on my phone, a notification popping up as I folded laundry, the mundane task grounding me against the chaos unfolding online. Ryan was done, his career crumbling like the facade he'd built around himself. Comments under Ava's article were a flood, some praising her reporting, others sharing their own stories, a chorus of voices breaking the silence I'd once thought was mine alone. But then came Ryan's response, a video he posted on Instagram from what looked like his buddy's couch, his hair messy, eyes red like he'd been up all night. "They're painting me as a monster," he said, his voice cracking, practiced but brittle. "Daisy's struggling, you know? She's not the woman you think she is. She's vengeful, trying to ruin me." He wiped his eyes, the performance so convincing I almost believed it myself for a split second. Almost. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I opened my phone's cloud folder, the one I'd kept locked away for years, and found the photo I'd taken the night before our wedding. My wrist, wrapped in a hospital band, the date stamped clear as day. Ryan had driven me to the ER, told the nurse I'd tripped on the stairs, his arm around me like a loving husband while I bit my lip to keep from screaming. I'd saved that photo, not knowing why, maybe just to remind myself I wasn't crazy. Now I posted it to my Instagram, no caption, no explanation. Just the truth, ugly and undeniable, the sterile white of the hospital band against my bruised skin. The internet exploded. Shares, comments, messages, a tidal wave of support and outrage. One message stopped me cold. It was from a woman named Chloe, her profile picture a blurry selfie with a dog. "I was one of his patients," she wrote. "He did the same to me. Thank you for speaking up." My knees buckled, not from fear but from the weight of connection, the realization that Ryan's shadow stretched further than I'd known. I typed back, "You're not alone anymore." My hands didn't shake as I hit send. That afternoon, my phone buzzed again, this time a call from an unknown number. I answered, cautious but unafraid. "Daisy Palmer." The voice was calm, professional, a woman's. "This is Tarun Everett from the Fulton County DA's office. We're reopening your case." I stood in the middle of my apartment, the hardwood floor cool under my bare feet, and listened as she explained. The audio files, the photos, the article, they'd broken through the procedural barriers that had kept my case buried. "I'm sorry it took this long," she said, her voice softening. I could have asked why, could have poured out years of frustration, but instead I said, "Thank you for catching up." She chuckled, a small acknowledgement of the truth in my words, and we set a meeting for Thursday. I hung up and walked to the window, the candle Lauren had given me still sitting on the sill, unlit but present. Parking lot outside was quiet now, the sun dipping low, casting long shadows across the asphalt. My reflection in the glass was faint, the bruise under my eye fading to a sickly yellow like old fruit. I touched it gently, not to soothe but to remember. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about Chloe, Mia, Lauren, and every woman whose voice had been drowned out by men like Ryan. I'd spent years shrinking, hiding, believing I was the problem. But now, standing in this small, imperfect apartment, I felt something new, not anger, not relief, but a quiet strength, like a tree that's weathered too many storms to fall. I sat back down, opened my laptop, and reread Ava's article. Comments were still pouring in, a digital wildfire. One stood out from a stranger. She didn't break the silence. She survived it. That's louder. It had thousands of shares, a reminder that truth doesn't need to scream to be heard. I closed the laptop, my fingers lingering on the lid. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, I wasn't fighting alone. I lit the candle, its flame small but steady, and whispered to the empty room, "We're not invisible anymore." That night, I stood by the window of my new studio apartment, a small space with creaky floors and walls so thin I could hear the neighbor's TV. It wasn't much, but it was mine, a sanctuary carved out of chaos. Parking lot outside glowed amber under streetlights, and the air carried the faint hum of a distant highway. I lit the candle Lauren had given me, its flame dancing against the glass, casting a soft glow that felt like a promise. I wasn't praying, not anymore. I was reminding myself, I deserve peace. The bruise under my eye was nearly gone, a faint yellow shadow, but the weight of it lingered, not as shame, but as proof I'd survived. The next day, Mia, Lauren, Sophia, and I walked into the courthouse, our steps steady on the worn stone steps. The building loomed, all cold marble and fluorescent lights, but it didn't intimidate me anymore. We carried folders, my divorce papers, the protective order, but no speeches, no tears. We didn't need grand gestures. The truth in our hands was enough. It didn't scream, it spoke, clear and unshakable. As we left, the candle in my coat pocket felt heavier than the papers, a quiet symbol of the light we'd found together. Standing on the courthouse lawn, I whispered, "There are bruises no one sees, but there's also healing that doesn't ask permission." From this, I've learned 5 things I want to share. First, your silence doesn't protect you, it buries you. Speak even if your voice shakes. Second, evidence is your armor. Document everything because truth needs receipts. Third, you don't need everyone to believe you, just one person who does can change everything. Fourth, healing starts when you choose yourself, not when others choose you. Finally, you're never alone. There are others waiting to stand with you. Find them. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to keep these voices heard. Let's light more candles together.